Hi there. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sam Bhagwat. I'm the co-founder of Gatsby and now principal engineer at Netlify. And I'm here with Jeremy and Keith. Jeremy and Keith are at Assemble, which is a Seattle-based digital consultancy that specializes in retail for fashion. Jeremy is the founder and president, and Jeremy Norberg is the founder and president of Assemble, and Keith Karlick is the VP of Customer Experience and Design. Great to be here with you guys.
Thanks, Sam, for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to just chat. I think we've all seen a lot of changes in this world so much in the last few years, and it's great to just be able to talk about what's happened.
Definitely.
In
more ways than one.
Oh, for sure. I guess let's just start out and maybe you can talk a little bit about yourselves and how you and Assemble got into the composable web world.
Great question. So we've been in business for about almost 12 years now. Started in 2010. Our background is engineering. We started off doing mobile. Then we moved into kind of bigger architecture. And then as mobile started to kind of merge with the web, in terms of we started to see more and more web-based applications versus just websites, we started to make that transition as well. So we've been doing this on and off for 12 years. Our first, quote, composable web application, we actually built in 2011 for a large Fortune 1 company back in the day that was deployed on Akamai. And which is, it was a trip, but there was absolutely no backend. We didn't have any backend services. It wasn't a Rails app. It wasn't a PHP app. There was no Java. It was pure JavaScript. It was a kind of a pre-built custom framework that we built in jQuery just to be able to push it out. And it was a client requirement. We couldn't have a backend service to run this. Back in the day, this organization didn't have easy ways of doing that, and they were very protective. And so we wrote it using a different deployment strategy. And so that was our first entree. We ended up building that app 3 times. And we went through multiple different, so we started off with jQuery, then we moved to underscore, and then we moved to, and then finally it ended up being a React app. And it's still, to this day, is still kind of a React based app sitting publicly available for lots of people to use every day.
That's incredible. It sounds like you might have been doing the work for an organization that puts a real precise emphasis on things being right.
Maybe. That's why we just refer to them as Fortune 1.
Yes. Well, so how did you? So that's great sort of background. How did the agency kind of get from that sort of initial project to more in the Jamstack JavaScript based composable web world?
Well, I mean, the majority of it was client based, and we're a client service company, so professional services. So we always have been really lucky in that we've been able to do a lot of greenfield projects. We don't generally just kind of pop in and take over and do managed services or anything like that. We've always been kind of, super hired guns to come in and do kind of really hard things. And so as those hard things progressed, we continued to see, this composable thing as being a big deal. And we just continue to push on it. About 2 years ago, we did make a strong positioning decision where we decided to go all in on retail. And then specifically, and within that retail spaces, we decided to go all in on apparel and fashion. Because for this reason, we finally saw a chink in the theme-based deployment of online stores. And so, as headless commerce started to be a thing, we're like, oh my, finally it's here. This is, and there's, if you think about all the number of applications that are out there that are commerce based, and how many of them are theme based and the limitations that is, and especially coming from a developer perspective, it's just like doing versioning control on a theme is,
Yeah.
nothing but
Your ability
frustration.
to create like really interesting digital experiences is like so reduced under that. I want to dive more into that, but Keith, can you share a little bit about your entree into this space?
Sure. Yeah. I've been on the agency side for almost 15 years now. Done a lot of work at large and small brands, Fortune 50 down to startups. A lot of my purview has always been on customer experience and the design side and kind of creating mostly e-commerce sites that drive sales and engagement. But so launched. I tried to put a list together the other day. I don't think that I can even remember the amount of sites over the years that have been that I've touched.
We all forget. It's like in the back of our head somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I did that thing 8 years ago. That was really cool. But yeah, it's so yeah, I guess it's been around for a little while.
Yeah, it's like a symptom of like developers once we hit our 30s or 40s. It's like, I did work with that technology. It was like 8 years ago, 10. It was good tech, and like we start thinking about it, and then you were like, then you spend like 15 minutes and you really get into the project details. But like it happens to me too. I'm like, yeah, that was a cool technology. I'd completely forgotten about it. Right? It's like sent it out of like L1 cache into like cold storage like tape somewhere, right?
Dev/null.
Brain fuel someday.
Right. The perils of the perils of not being a developer in our 20s anymore. Okay. So what's kind of interesting to you about the composable world, or like what have you seen?
So for me, I think that where it becomes really interesting is when you can, buy technologies that fit a specific business need. So you are able to, really, create experiences that are more compelling. But then from like a total cost of ownership standpoint, you're not trying to do like square peg, round hole because, your massive monolith, has this feature that you may or may not want. And I would say
that's such a great description. Like, the sort of the engineering part, but also the sort of the business part. And I feel like, we're probably going to like put our engineering hats on and nerd out for a while. Sorry to any sort of like, business folks that might be, and then like we might put our like business hats on and like nerd out about like, those things. But like so I think thanks for sharing that. So, let's kind of go back to and talk a little bit about like specifically like retail and the types of sites that you guys have worked on at Assemble. Like, what is it about the retail world that makes this new architecture so compelling or so interesting? Like, what is that pain point that, retail folks are like, we need to shift off of our existing architecture, even though that's not easy necessarily, even though that's not straightforward, and like look at this new stack.
Yeah. I would say speed of business. Is that especially within the apparel world, you are turning over 75% of your product line every 6 months. And so with that comes updated in marketing, updated in merchandising, massive content changes. So think about the whole life cycle of like what content looks like, images, video, copy, kind of all of it. And when you have this like massive turnover of information on a pretty rapid period, you also need to be able to adopt new technology really quickly. Is that like, there's some looking at some of the larger sites out there, kind of larger retailers, that are able to test, new content. I mean, you're seeing folks using video on category pages to look at, like spends of products. You can see it, the returns ecosystem is becoming a really big deal, how you manage that, the try on at home, there's just like, I think that brand.
Can you give like an example or two of someone that came to you guys with like, hey, this is a burning problem for me and here's why?
Yeah. So one of my longtime clients in the past, they've done custom dry suits for kayaking, and so they make a lot of custom products. And so the challenge for them is not just selling online, but also having the ability to really customize these things and then have it drop into their manufacturing, so that way that they can build to order really quickly. So that like just in time style of manufacturing, and then having a customer experience that can drive that gets complex.
That's fascinating. So like they were kind of transitioning from sort of having a form and a checklist where they would maybe walk through people on the phone or whatever to like, okay, like you can literally just go to the website and, click these options and sort of see what you're going to get at. I mean, if it's made to order, I've got to assume it's 6 figures, 7 figures price point.
Yeah, probably more in like the 4 figures, but yeah, that the idea that, in the past you had to either call somebody or, fill out a form and a human would get back to you, up to now where you click options and, your prices are affect different options. And then, you're able to see it, right there. And then when you place your order, you're buying all the components and it drops right into their manufacturing system.
Yeah. So I think back to those commercials you'd see in the 90s, like the dude, I'm getting a Dell kind of commercials. Right. Mm-hmm. And like this whole idea of just being able to like customize your thing and like add the right options and whatever it may be. And like now we're kind of like taking that technology, which is really only available to technology companies, and kind of bringing it to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, and then that product customization, personalization is a big one, but also kind of like the ongoing communication before and after. So if you're going to drop, a few $1,000 on anything, that's going to be a fairly considered purchase. So, how do we stay in touch with somebody, leading up to that sale, and then post sale, how do you keep that customer for life?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what types of, this is I guess a broad question, but what types of results do you typically see when someone sort of transitions to this new stack? Or like, is there like a person, like maybe a customer or two that really stands out from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think that across the board, every site that I've launched onto a composable architecture has seen, a few points of conversion increase based on performance alone. Right. That's the immediate win. Your checkout is fresh and it's new. I mean, that definitely has an impact. You're going to be using the latest and greatest of whatever your feature set of technology is, but performance alone, is going to get you a couple points of conversion. I would say that kind of the next one is, being able just to think about what your feature set is over kind of a multi-year period, and then managing adoption of new technologies accordingly. I mean, 2 years ago, like 2019, SMS marketing wasn't a thing other than in a few pretty specific categories. Now it's prolific. So that happened, probably because of COVID, or accelerated because of COVID. That happened really quickly. And so like, if you only have an email marketing platform that doesn't integrate with SMS, or you only have, how do you adopt a whole new strategy and a whole new product within like a 8-12 month period.
The stat that I love, and I'll sort of plug my book a little here while I'm at it, is so I found it when I was researching, and it was that the buy online and pick up in store went from, it was like 8% of retail in March of 2020 had that feature, and by July of 2020 it was 45%. It just went to the top of everybody's, priority list, like from somewhere down in the backlog to the CEOs, like, pinging you every day, like, when are we going to ship this? When are we going to ship this? When are we going to ship this? Because COVID just accelerated that. And I think that's actually like a good launching point to talk about sort of the e-commerce, I don't know what you want to call them, feature list or feature stack, or like, what are those things that larger retail customers want and find it a struggle to get with their sort of existing systems and the features that, they can sort of ship easily or more easily using a composable architecture.
Yeah. Our head of strategy over here for retail at Assemble, she is preaching inventory management, and I agree with her 110%. Is that, in an omni-channel world, if you're a large retailer and you have inventory in retail and you have inventory online, and if you can't sell both, or they're disconnected for some reason, or they're in the wrong place, which takes an extra few days to get it to the customer, that's a problem. So I think that, how that applies to Composable, ease of integration, or being able to, extrapolate integration layers and business technologies compared to front end. But yeah, and I feel like that, the kind of the word or I should say that kind of the strategy that we have for 23, kind of what we feel like our biggest pain points are for retailers is going to be, driving for profitability, and then inventory management and access of inventory as it relates to expediency of getting the item to the customer is going to be at the forefront of that.
Sure. And then you said that returns were also part of that story?
I think the returns, especially within apparel, are an important part of the overall customer experience, especially within an e-commerce world. If you can't go and try it on, then having an easy returns process builds confidence in the initial purchase, because that if it doesn't fit you or if you don't like it, you can send it back.
Yeah, I've actually seen this personally. So I recently lost about 35 pounds. And so I stopped being an XL, and now I'm like an XL slim fit, or sometimes like I'm a large. And so the clothing that I've been ordering, like sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't fit, and sometimes it depends on the brand. And so I'm like figuring that out along the way over the last few months. And like, I've been really sort of fascinated. There's a couple of times where I've been able to go to like a local sort of like office supply store nearby me and like drop off, and they'll just sort of like handle it all themselves. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, this is like simpler than I've ever had like online ordering before. It's, and like, I'm like, and it's funny because I see that and I'm like, oh, hey, this is some of these like composable features being added in the e-commerce space by this architecture that we're all talking about. Right.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah. And then the other way at it that you're seeing more folks or larger retailers experiment with is the try on at home or try before you buy. Yeah. I think that, that probably works pretty well at like the Amazon level, or, where you're just, where you're just ginormous. But I would bet for mid-market retailers, and even, that they're going to struggle with that because they have so much of their dollars locked up in that inventory. And if that inventory isn't able to be sold, that's going to create a challenge. So I don't know if there's a perfect solution. I mean, returns kind of presents a similar challenge where if I buy 3 sizes to try on and I'm going to return 2 of them, it's kind of the same issue. But I think that kind of the experience that you're talking about is how you get the initial sale. That's a really confidence building tool, because it's like, if I don't like this for whatever reason, I'm going to not only be able to return it, but I'm going to be able to drive, walk, take the bus down to the nearest whatever, and then, drop it off without a box or anything else. And it's just handled.
Yeah. I sort of, it was in the middle of taking my kids home from school, like brought them into the store, like just gave it to the person, like stopped my kids from running around the store. They processed it. It was, and it was really straightforward. And the web flow, not to dive too much into this particular idiosyncratic experience, but it even kind of prompted me like, hey, like, why are you returning it? Oh, it's too large. Oh, well, would you like to exchange it for a large instead? Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll do that. And like, I think, user behaviors change over time. And once people get used to that new thing, though, to your point, they may stop ordering it in 2 different sizes, because they'll know that if they order the smaller size, it's going to be real easy to return for like the larger size, and the whole experience will seem like smooth and straightforward.
Oh, I would like to add one of the other parts that we think is really important to this, though, is that one of the other advantages of doing Composable is that the amount of advanced advanced components that we can actually build with Composable will slow us from even having to do the return. I mean, the ideal here is that, we minimize the impact that, that returns actually has. I mean, right now it's a huge percentage of overall loss. An example of what we hear is UPS is the largest warehouse because almost everybody's inventory is in transit, either coming or going, which is kind of scary to think about, that it's not even under your control. And so, that idea of having so much inventory kind of in the channel that you have no control over and have poor reporting and visibility on is a big issue for companies, especially if, again, if you think about a 90 or even a 6-month product cycle, if somebody waits too long, you have a product that is worthless, and then it becomes a landfill issue. And I mean, all the other components that go along with it. So we see Composable as, having more unique engineering experiences that we can build, hopefully will reduce some of that return altogether.
Oh, so, and I think there's like one thing that like really stands out to me, which is the life cycle of a lot of these things. It's like, look, if you have a piece of summer clothing, you kind of need to sell it by a certain point in time. You're only going to maybe start selling it in like March or so, and then like by the time it hits April, or by the time it hits like July, August, September, like you're going to start discounting that thing, and like you may not want to keep it for the next season. The fashions may be different then, and so you literally have to mark it down to zero if you can't kind of get it out the door, which I think is just comes back to the huge ROI in retail specifically.
Yeah, there's a few companies out there that are trying to do algorithmic size recommendations. And I think to your point, Sam, around you giving feedback to the company about like why you're returning it, it becomes a useful tool, because that's kind of what will drive some of those recommendations. And some of those companies, I think, depending on the product category, are pretty interesting, and their levels of accuracy vary. As you get more specialty, they fall off just because their data set isn't large enough. But I think that, kind of maybe the second part of that confidence building is, as those tools mature and their data sets get larger and everything else, that their quality of recommendations will be better. So then when you go to the brand and you're like, you know what, not only has this size large fit me in the past, but they are recommending that I buy a size large based on some inputs that I've given it. And then I think the other thing that happens is that, that drives repurchase within that brand. And I'm a prime example of that. There's like a handful of companies that I know fits me. I hate shopping. Like, to say that we're focused on apparel, and I am not a fashion-based person.
You and me both.
I like clothes well enough, but they're not. It's not something that I'm really going to go out of my way to do. So like, I am that person. I want to buy it online. I want free returns, and I want it to be really easy. And I'm likely to buy a couple sizes and return one of them. And so like there's a handful of companies and retailers that I shop from pretty regularly, because I just know that it fits. It takes all the challenge away. And so like in that particular scenario, that brand, if they were to reinforce my confidence around, is it going to fit me? And it takes then my only decision is around, do I like it from like a style standpoint, and do I want to buy it from like a price and availability standpoint? They're going to drive increased loyalty, right? Like, why would I go anywhere else? Is it every 6 months when they come out with their new stuff, I'll go check it out and buy whatever I feel like I need.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we long ago went to like buying lots of books online and buying, electronics often online, because we know that, it's the same quality as we're going to get in the store, and there's not going to be any fit issues. Why haven't like clothes gone there to that degree? It's because we are worried about the fit issues, and we do kind of want to try it on. And it's sort of really interesting to your point of kind of to see how that will kind of evolve over time as we continue to kind of get this better. I mean, I actually purchased eyeglasses online, not these ones, from a large brand that just, could sort of like you could point your iPhone camera at your face and it would, put the glasses on you. And I was like, this is great. And it was the first time I'd done that, and like okay, if we figured that out for glasses, because people are used to shooting their, their phones at their faces, like, can we figure that out for like the rest of, clothes as well? Like, is it like, are there other things? But I think, overall, and I think we may be shifting here from and which I think is the shift we want to make from the business side to the technology side. Doing these things ends up making your website more like an application, and less like just sort of like a storefront where it's like, oh, I'm going to like, okay, I'm going to walk in and grab this, come out. It has more of that logic around, well, what's the fit look like, and what's the returns process look like? And we start thinking about it more in terms of like user journeys and things that we're like thinking about from like a technology application standpoint than oh yeah, I'm going to walk in and grab the, the XL off the rack or the L off the rack of the size 3 or the size 7 or whatever it may be. Right. And so I think like, maybe this is a good time to sort of ask, like, what's the technology stack that you guys sort of like tend to use for different or tend to use or tend to recommend for various kinds of like composable retail projects?
Yeah. Before we jump into that, can I just offer up, we were talking about projects before. Yeah. That's actually a good segue into talking about eyewear. Uh-huh. So when the big project that I worked for the healthcare company was for their eyewear division. And what was really interesting about Composable specifically was that we needed a decoupled front end for 2 reasons. One was HIPAA, is that their internal systems, they were doing some really interesting tech where they had a piece of middleware and it was tokenizing all customer information. So the front end was completely unaware of any customer specific, not to mention RX information. And then they were able to tie that back to, MRN and, customer specific information on their back end. Right. So that's kind of like the first piece on why like Composable was really kind of a requirement just to be able to pass through data in that way. So that way we could create, a really interesting design experience while also supporting their, massive, security and compliance teams, not to mention kind of the IT infrastructure behind it. The second interesting thing that we did as part of that is that because this company was an insurer and a provider, we were able to offer eyeglasses and personalize that experience really based on your prescription. So we knew what your pupil diameter is, what your eye size is, what your RX is. So then when you log in and you select one of the prescription that you're shopping for, because you could have multiple, then we were able to personalize the frames that you were going to buy based on your prescription. So if you had a really high prescription, meaning thick lenses, we weren't going to recommend titanium frames to you because it's going to look funny. You're going to have a lot of like lens reveal, right? On the flip side, is that when we know what your eye size is, we know the area of that lens that is going to work for you just based on how you're going to look through the lens and kind of the angle of where the ideal kind of when the cutout of the lens is, like where the ideal kind of focal component is. And so like what that meant though is that on every login session, we had to get prescription data from the system, from their internal system. And then we had to perform like trigonometry, like math in the front end, right? In order to create the calculations that tied your prescription to our frame qualification. So all of our product data had all this criteria for what would work within the certain ranges, but we had to to transcribe that from the prescription. So think about doing that on a monolithic platform, right? You're going to go into any of them, not to be named, but any of them, and you're going to tell me that you're going to go in and you're going to build actual calculations into the front end. I mean, that's
good luck.
Yeah, right.
FYI, I have never used the math.cosine or math.sine functions in JavaScript. And so this is the first project I've heard of that has ever used those. This is amazing. It's good to know that they're, the web.
They actually work.
Right? Yeah.
So you talk about why composable. Mm-hmm. That's your reason, is that how else could we create that kind of experience? It's super slick.
That's awesome. That's amazing. It's a fascinating deep dive. And that healthcare company was a very large West Coast based healthcare provider.
Yep.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients.
Yeah, probably.
And so like, because I think it's just a fascinating story of how you deploy technology at scale, right?
I think that's the bigger way to say, or the better way to say it, is it less, is it a large healthcare provider that services millions of customers, and you have, large IT infrastructure behind the scenes that is largely, unmovable, right? Like that works how it works. And then you have this, compliance and security entity that sits between inside and outside the world, or your individual worlds, and that Composable allowed us to create these really interesting experiences, highly personalized, that also then supported their existing IT infrastructure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, and Jeremy, you're going to jump in there for a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to start to kind of answer what our ideal stack would be, and kind of what our, so our kind of first part is that we are a React shop. We do have some Vue components. We have a couple of major Vue projects that we do as well, but the majority of our stuff is React. We're also a huge Next.js house. Sorry. But that said, we have a ginormous Gatsby application for that same Fortune 1 company. So we've got experience on both. I think and then of course, from a deployment perspective for our enterprise clients, we have a lot of, we deploy on their infrastructure. But for anybody else, our go-to is Netlify as well. So, we love zero DevOps. That's a life that we love. And Netlify gives us that opportunity.
And can you kind of walk through like why each part of that tech stack, like your reasoning and thought process, and I'll have some questions after that. But
yeah, so from our perspective with React, we started with Vue. Vue felt more comfortable at first, and it had some. We also were a huge Rails house as well. We did a lot of Rails code, and so it felt comfortable. There were components to it that felt comfortable with it. But as we kind of watched the market continue to evolve, React just got big fast, and at the end of the day, what we produce for folks is we've got to be thinking about their long-term ROI on projects, and also serviceability and all the other parts of it. And React became kind of that main part. As it relates to why Next.js as kind of our go-to, it was really based on they just seem to be running a little bit faster on some of the core features that we thought were important. SSR was one of those. The idea of doing server-side rendering, the middleware components that they added, all of that stuff became, because if you think about from Keith's example of the iCare project, that having that ability of having the best of not only client-driven development, but also having strong server back, but having it part of the same code base. That to us was like, okay, now magic can happen, because we can do the stuff that we want to do before it ever gets to the client. And then when we do hydrate and then we start to do stuff on the client, it becomes super value add, super customization, but we still get the performance of having these SSR based delivery mechanisms. And that was really important to us, getting access to that back end data, especially for enterprise clients where we're never going to expose an enterprise tool to the client. It's going to have to be server to server. And so how do we maintain that? So those are always really important ones. And then why we chose Netlify as our kind of core DevOps thing was, any number of reasons. The first one is that we hate deploying. I mean, every engineer hates deploying, and building out your own infrastructure is just such a pain. And then the other part that we fell in love with is that it didn't push us into one particular project type. We could do Next.js, we could do Vue, we could do a direct React. I mean, theoretically, you can throw a Go app in there. We could throw a Rails app into there. It didn't matter from that perspective, but we could get all the benefits of being able to do just really, really cool deployments, and not worry about deployment at all. Deployment as a service to us was just like, okay, magic is going to happen because engineers could focus just on building great customer experience.
Yeah, tomorrow I'm doing a webinar with our head of customer support, who's a huge Unix nerd and is going to tell everybody about all the different things you can do with boxes on Netlify if you want to set up that kind of deploy pipeline. But I think this it's kind of fun and it's going to be a fun conversation. But I think this is exactly why that feature is valuable. Is there's something. We are engineers. We want the thing that we build to have the maximum future proofing, because our job is literally to build custom applications. If it is not a custom application, you are probably not talking to us as engineers. You are probably talking to someone else, and so we want to own the ability to customize it in any direction that the future may take us. And having that flexibility is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really critical, and just to this is part of a more of a push towards Composable, is this idea that the customer experience has been owned by, the couple of the players, and so when you have a theme, you're totally tied into that ecosystem at an epic layer. And with Composable, you remove that dependency, and you start to be able to pull yourself away from being completely dependent. So inventory is a great example of that. If you're in an omni-channel situation where you've got inventory sitting in multiple venues, and this is from experience. We had a retailer that we were talking to where they physically separated their wholesale and their brick and mortar store inventory from their online inventory because the platform that they used controlled all of their online inventory. And so they would actually do physical moves of product in order to maintain inventory integrity. And
there's this law, and I forget what law it is, but it's your org structure shows up in your software.
Absolutely.
This is the reverse thing, where your software is literally influencing, we have to keep these goods separate from those goods, because even though they're the same goods, the different systems control them.
Well, and patient zero for a lot of those things are really interesting things. They weren't patient zero when we started, when we were a $1 million a year retailer, having these unified applications that have every feature known to man. You can run your whole business on them. They start to break down when they're no longer the best in category for each one of those silos. So, you shouldn't be using some of these platforms to do inventory when you're doing $12 to $50 million in inventory. There's better solutions for doing inventory, and you get all the benefits of it. And then trying to make sure that you're syncing all of that stuff becomes a nightmare. When you try to sync it and have two different sources of truth and all of that stuff. And so with Composable, this idea is that I don't care anymore. I'm going to go to the source of truth. I'm going to use the inventory system as my source of truth the way it should be. And because of, because I can actually inject stuff at the server side, and then it goes directly into the client, and then the client does all of the cool stuff around that inventory. It changes everything. And that performance is creates that customer experience. I know for sure that I'm going to be displaying and showing stuff that is actually relevant because I have it in stock. And just, having access to that stuff is what Composable gives us. The other thing I wanted to share, one last part is that the other part with Composable that we love too is in the traditional retail, we had 3 pages is really what we cared about: the front page, the PDP page, and the catalog page. Those are the 3 templates, and everything was built around those 3 templates. And, our thinking is that we don't care. Pages should no longer be a thing. It's a collection of components that make up whatever we're trying to fit in terms of a customer journey. And so not getting away from this mentality of pages and page templates and moving more towards customer journeys and the components that build that customer journey out becomes really important for us.
And where I've seen that, like page-centric versus component-centric thing sort of like really flare up is in the demo process, right? We're all used to like, oh, well, we built you this page, or well, we built you that page. And, the thing is like that when we're building by components, we're not necessarily building that way. We might be building, well, I built these components and then I built those components. And so like it can be a challenge. And we've heard different agencies navigate this different ways of like, how do you demo to stakeholders when you've completed 30% or 40% or 50% of the components, but you don't actually have any pages that are ready yet.
You just have to build demos.
As you say. There we go. I love that. I love that perspective. So then like you also kind of touched on sort of some of the different areas, and I'd like to sort of push you where Composable provides benefits. And Keith, that was something you were talking earlier. You talked about performance, getting like you get a few points just from the performance on your conversion rates, right? How would you break down the separate categories of benefits to people and organizations that build with Composable?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're talking about like the framework of like TCO would be a benefit, performance would be a benefit, right?
Yeah, and sort of like how would you quantify that? And I'm more thinking from the perspective of somebody who's listening who might be a tech lead or a director at an organization who's like thinking of going on this journey, and they need to make the PowerPoint deck that says, typically organizations that go to a composable architecture have like a several point conversion lift, for example. Then like what's the next slide, and how do you quantify that benefit?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first bucket is performance. You're seeing, they've been there for a while now, but Google for SEO, contextual layout shift is, and some of these other pieces around like how you create really lightning fast experiences. That's kind of the first one. Composable just lends itself to, lighter weight applications, not to mention offline browsing and some of these other custom, those components. I think the second one is freedom of choice. And freedom of choice really is the ability to quickly adopt new technologies, even if it is in an experimental phase. Because if you have to take on a technology and it's then going to cost you $300,000 to integrate said technology, that is no longer a quick experiment, right? That might be the reality at in some enterprise level, but for mid-market and some of those companies, productized integrations and technologies that own the product roadmap and how it integrates, I think that is really powerful. You look at not only the composable space, but like the SaaS commerce space, and you're seeing product vendors just have a much higher volume of vendor-owned integrations, which is kind of that provides that freedom of choice, and that kind of leads into the third one, which is total cost of ownership. I think that the freedom of choice and total cost of ownership kind of go hand in hand a little bit, but I think they're separate enough. Is that especially in today's economy, just lots of volatility. Everyone's figuring out how to just manage their business more or with less cost, and having a clear view on what that looks like, and then being able to make changes. I think is how how you manage total cost of ownership. Because, for example, if you are buying a feature from a monolith that you don't use, then that's not real helpful for you. Even worse is that if you're not using the feature and then you have to buy another platform, to get the feature that you want, it's like insult to injury. So I think that, having a technology stack that is really lean, really nimble, able to be changed and modified on an easy basis is how you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, and thanks for laying those sort of like three benefits out, kind of the conversion benefits from performance, the sort of flexibility and freedom of choice, and then finally like the total cost of ownership of your systems. And I think this is probably like a good question to sort of like end on, but how do you get there? I mean, change is hard in organizations. Everyone needs to move one step at a time towards the future, right? So can you share like a story or two or lessons that you've seen of organizations that have figured out how to take that first step or that second step or that third step?
I think what Composable, because you have freedom of choice, it forces you to have a strong strategy around what your business looks like today and what it looks like in the future. Because, selecting and adopting the technologies, those are almost the operational parts of a project or a roadmap or, single or multi-year initiatives. I mean, that can kind of vary on time based on the business. But where you get started is that you need to have a fairly clear picture on where your business is today, and then where you want it to be 6 months from now, or where you want it to be 2 years from now. And then you are able to, start to assess, what technologies are going to work for different aspects of my business. And then you need a good agency. And that's our shameless plug. Is that like a good agency like Assemble, we're going to be able to help you figure all that out.
Yeah. And the benefit I've seen is that folks who have done it, 3 or 5 or 10 times before are going to be able to give you the guidance on like, I know that sounds good, but that's actually not all it's cracked up to be, maybe about a specific technology or like solution, or like, you're thinking about X, but we've seen this thing that's like slightly different, but 90% what you'd be dramatically successful. So like, in kind of like lending their expertise from just seeing a number of different similar projects over time, especially ones that may be specific to your industry, right? We've seen like some of the experts that we love the most are specialists in B2B software, or they're specialists in retail, or they're specialists in some other kind of like specific vertical and are really well posed to help people within that vertical be successful. And I think like, so that thanks for sort of like laying that out. And I think what, to sort of summarize what you've described is the process, right, of becoming a leader, whether that's a tech lead or whether that's an architect or whether that's, sort of like going from maybe manager level to director levels, being able to not just think about your projects, but to think about sort of, well, where are we going as a company? And then how does the technology or the systems that we use need to sort of change to adapt to where we may be, not just today, but, the skate where the puck is going in 6 months or 12 months or 24 months. And I think that in many ways, composable architectures offer an opportunity for many folks who have wanted to demonstrate that kind of leadership to sort of step up and be the kind of the person in their organization who sees that part of the future and can kind of plan and help bring their org into the future.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. And I guess two thoughts there is that, the benefit that someone like us on the agency can give you is that, a lot of our clients, everybody has gone through a web project at some point in their career, but they've probably just done at most a handful, depending on, how many companies they've worked for. I mean, we're doing multiple a year. So like just the amount of reps that agencies like us get, compared to, operators inside of businesses, I think what you mentioned is a really valid point.
Keith, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being here. It's really great to have this chat, and I feel like it's just been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us on. Great to chat. Lovely to meet you. And yeah,
Sam, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure to meet you. First of all, we love the work that you've that you've done over the years. And we're super excited that you guys are at Netlify, one of our favorite partners. So thanks again for having us, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. It was a super fun conversation. Thanks for joining, and looking forward to our future chats.